Okay, good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the TRPA Operations and Governance Committee. It is Wednesday, January 24th, and the time is 8:32. May we please have the roll call to determine a quorum?
Ms. Bowman? Here. Ms. Dis?
Here.
Ms. Gustafson?
Here.
Ms. Hill?
Here.
Mr. Honigman?
Here.
Ms. Lean?
I'm here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I'll now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for January 24th, 2024. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address the committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your screen on the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you've used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For items that are agendized as informational only, we will hear public comment during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. Comments on items agendized for action or possible action, we will hear public comment before the committee takes any action. For our remote members who are online, if you wish to speak, you can also now raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. Finally, I'd also like to ask that all of our remote members turn on their cameras if they are able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment. You will be called on in front of the room to speak. Committee members who are in person, please raise your hand if you wish to comment and speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. If you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback into the room. Okay, let's move on to our first agenda item, which is approval of the agenda. Staff, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no changes, we will go ahead and deem the agenda approved as posted for the record. We're now going to look at agenda item number 2, which is approval of the minutes. Ms. Aldine is not here. This should go smoothly. We have a draft set of minutes. I'll just continue to jab at her since she abandoned the committee on top of it. We have a draft set of minutes from December 13th, 2023 on page 7 of our packets. Does any member of the committee wish to make a change? No changes? Online people? No, I don't see any changes. So may I please have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. That motion carries. That brings us to agenda item number 3, where we're going to recommend approval of the December financials. Information on this item can be found on page 81 of your packet. Mr. Kyler.
For the record, Chris Kyler, Finance Director for the agency. Before I start, I want to mention both to you and Cindy, we've had some problems in the last few months where the cameras were kind of dim, and so our remote participants could not clearly see people in the room. So we have upgraded that system, and hopefully this is our first time out, so hopefully it's going to work, but we've tested it exhaustively. So we now have a 4-camera system, and we have our sharp videographers at the back of the room controlling things, and hopefully it'll be a better experience for those remote.
So we can't hide?
No, and in fact, these are higher quality cameras.
Uh-oh.
So
Trouble.
They look good so far.
Yeah, I like the dim lights. Hide the age.
Okay, if I could have the next chart, please. Getting into things, we are halfway through the year. No major leans against the budget at this point. I've been talking a lot about planning fees and tracking the planning fees because they were falling a little bit behind.
Right.
But we had a really good December that brought it up, so we are above last year. We're above the average, so I'm starting to feel better about that. There were a few fee changes that were embedded in Arlo's package that you approved, and those are now kicked in. And at the end of this month, the actual inflation adjustment across the board for fees will kick in. So we do have that going in our advantage. But December was a big year, and Wendy is reporting that in January, they've been doing pretty good in terms of applications received. So the activity still seems to be in a pretty good space. The fees, I'm still going to talk about fees every month because that's kind of the big variable in our budget. The grants are cost reimbursement and the state funds are pretty much locked in. So those aren't variables on the revenue side. It's all fees. If I could have the next chart, please. This is the revenue side. As you can see, the grant revenues are still very low at only 10%, but we bill all the grants in arrears at the end of the quarter. So we're just now billing the second quarter of the fiscal year. We've also, and I think I mentioned this last time, we've had a few grants like the big Forest Health grant that we got at the beginning of the year, and it's still, we've now finally got some contracts out against that. So we'll start to spend against that, but we're well behind on that grant. This is part of the $5 million from the Forest Service. And some of the other grants too have been slow to ramp up because we're just getting started. The only remaining state money in that state revenue category is TSAC money, which is billed on a cost reimbursement basis. Everything else is in line. I could have the next chart, please. This is the expenditure side. Next chart, please. This is the expenditure side. Compensation is a little bit low because we still haven't filled the attorney position, but I think we have a path forward on attorney now. So that'll happen. Contracts always tends to lag a bit, so that's not a surprise that it's only at 25%. Everything else is pretty much on track and on budget, so I don't see any issues there. And if I could have the next chart, please. Here's your cash flow. Right now, the two graphs look similar. The one on the right, of course, is with and without mitigation funds, but we are anticipating the CTC project will be executing fairly soon. Maybe some of you have better information on that than we do. If that happens, then the two lines on that chart on the right are going to diverge sharply because we're going to be making a big transfer either to CTC or to the escrow account for the acquisition. Otherwise, this is the same as last month. We peaked because of all the state revenues coming in early, and now it's just a long downhill slide until the end of the year as we spend down those funds. And if I can have the next chart, please. Just to remind everybody what this is, under GASB 84, we're now required to report our mitigation fund receipts and expenditures as revenue and expenses in our financial statements. Everything I've been presenting to you in this room has been the word in the finance community, we call it pro forma, as if financial statements, and I've excluded that from the statements I'm showing you here, but I told you I would brief you quarterly on the mitigation funds. The reason I pull it out is exactly what you're seeing here is we collect the mitigation revenues when we issue permits, when the permit's acknowledged. So it comes in over time. But the actual disbursements are when one of the counties or somebody comes forward with a project. So right now you look at this and say, we have 1.2 million in revenue and only 100,000 of expenses against that revenue. So it has a very distortional impact on the financial statements. And that will be enhanced even more if the CTC project goes through, because then all of a sudden we'll be in a huge negative position because they're going to be spending down money that's been accumulating for years. And they've intentionally accumulated it for years because they were anticipating a big project for that. So I don't like the distortional impact that has on our financial statements. So I am going to continue to show you the pro forma ones that exclude this, this activity. But then we'll still brief this on a periodic basis. Doing good on mitigation funds. I mean, there's $15 million out there to be spent on projects, and counties are working on it, coming up with ideas and things to do. Very few disbursements so far. And I also say that this is real disbursements. It's not authorizations. So for example, you've already authorized the CTC money, but it hasn't actually been transferred. So it won't show up on this chart until we actually disperse the funds.
Chris, I just wanted to ask, is that the project down here in South Lake Tahoe, the hotel?
The
Okay.
acquisition. Yeah,
great.
and I think it's gonna be March or April that they're aiming to close. Is that what you heard? Yeah, I believe that's
Great.
the latest I've heard.
I drove by and I was just curious where that was going. So it's good to hear that it's going to happen.
Everything takes forever. But yeah, the plan there is we'll actually, I think, kick that money into the escrow account to help close on the deal. So other than that, I mean, all we've really done is I think there was a release to the city, and then there was another release to Washoe County for some various projects. Shay will be briefing you today on another release, but again, that won't turn into actual cash out the door until we get further into the project. I also want to note on here, just so people know that we do invest this money and interest accrues on this money. TRPA does not collect that interest. It goes into the mitigation funds and increases the amount of the mitigation fund that's available for projects. So all the money that we earn on that balance gets plowed back into the actual purpose of the mitigation fund. And in some cases, there are a few expenses like O&M expenses that can't be paid by mitigation fund, but can be paid out of the interest. So we keep close track of the colors of money on that. That's it for my financial presentation, unless somebody has any questions for me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cutler. Are there any questions from committee members in the room? No? Okay, are there any questions from either Ms. Dis or Ms. Hill?
None for me, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will then.
No, thank you.
Thank you. We'll then go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee on this item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Staff, do you see any online comments?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go ahead and close public comment. Are there any further questions or comments from the committee? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
That's easy enough. Thank you. Okay, there's a motion to approve the December financials. Any further discussion? Okay, Maria, may we please have a roll call vote on this one?
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Bowman,
Yes.
Mr. Honigman,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Lane.
Yes,
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
thank you. That brings us to agenda item number 4, discussion and possible recommendation for release of Tahoe Keys Water Quality Mitigation Fund interest in the amount of $200,000 to match grant funds pursued and to initiate planning for the Tahoe Keys Lagoons long-term water quality improvement project. Information on this item can be found on page 103 of your packet. And Ms. Navarro, I believe you will be presenting on this item.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, committee members. My name is Shay Navarro. I'm the Watersheds and Water Quality Program Manager here at TRPA, and I'm going to be presenting on the Tahoe Keys Property Owners Association request to release Tahoe Keys Water Quality Mitigation Funds for the Tahoe Keys Lagoons Long-Term Water Quality Improvement Project. And I'll provide a brief overview of the project, background on the mitigation fund itself, since it's a little bit different from our typical water quality mitigation fund, and staff recommendations. And I also have Rick Lind sitting here with me, who is the consultant representing the TKPOA, to help answer any questions. Next slide, please. So as most of you should well be aware of, the Tahoe Keys is located in South Lake Tahoe. It was first established in the late 1950s by dredging and grading a portion of the Upper Truckee Marsh to create a suburban residential development with 11 miles of backyard lagoons or waterways. And the lagoons receive urban stormwater runoff and are more than 90% covered with aquatic invasive weeds, which negatively impact their water quality. And the lagoon's water quality is also being impacted by climate change, which in Tahoe, we're seeing a greater fluctuation of extreme events between drought and flood conditions. Next slide, please. The Tahoe Keys Lagoons Long-Term Water Quality Improvement Project aims to mitigate local and regional non-point source nutrient and pollutants that are inputted to the lagoons from the Tahoe Keys and South Lake Tahoe developments upstream. This initial planning phase of the project aims to identify restoration and treatment strategies that would improve the circulation and water quality of the Tahoe Keys lagoons, reduce spread of aquatic invasive weeds, and reduce the risks and impacts to the adjacent and hydrologically connected Pope Marsh and Lake Tahoe. It's a complementary project to the Tahoe Keys Control Methods Test and green infrastructure planning projects that are happening in the Tahoe Keys. Next slide, please. Requested funds would support stakeholder engagement and coordination, refinement of goals and objectives, analyzing existing conditions, identifying restoration and treatment opportunities and constraints, and initiating planning to formulate project alternatives. This initial planning phase has a 3 to 5 year timeline and follows the EIP Stormwater Quality Improvement Committee, or SQIC, project delivery process and formulating and evaluating alternatives process. These were both developed specifically for stormwater improvement projects. Next slide, please. So some background on the Tahoe Keys Water Quality Mitigation Fund. This fund is money that was collected specifically from Tahoe Keys properties. It was created by the TRPA and Lahontan to mitigate the water quality impacts from development of the Tahoe Keys, and it applied to construction of Tahoe Keys homes that were allowed to be built on the remaining lots after a change in the Keys land capability classification from stream environment zone to a man-modified stream environment zone. And TRPA has since inherited the CTRPA funds. Today, any mitigation funds collected for construction in the Tahoe Keys would go to the city's Water Quality Mitigation Fund, but these are a separate pot of money. And TRPA and Lahontan previously released the principal fund, the majority of the principal of the fund in 2001 for EIP project implementation in the watershed that is upstream of the Tahoe Keys, but close to 450,000 remain in mitigation fund interest. And that's what we're talking about here today. The TRPA Governing Board policy guidelines for the release of mitigation funds, which is shown in attachment C of the staff reports, permits the use of mitigation fund interest for project planning. Next slide, please. So TRPA staff requests that you approve the release of 200,000 from the Tahoe Keys Water Quality Mitigation Fund interest for the Tahoe Keys Lagoons Long-Term Water Quality Improvement Project planning. 100,000 will initiate planning of the project and 100,000 will provide match for grant funding if awarded. The account balance is sufficient to cover the request and release. The release will also supplement dedicated TKPOA funding that is generated through a property owner approved special assessment that shares a fund of the project. The project is consistent with Lahontan's waste discharge requirements for the Tahoe Keys. And since Lahontan jointly established this water quality mitigation fund with TRPA, they also approved the requested release in December last month, which you can see in the letter provided by Lahontan in attachment B of the staff report. The project aligns with the intent of the Tahoe Keys Water Quality Mitigation Fund to mitigate water quality from the development of the Tahoe Keys itself and aligns with the SQIC processes. The request is consistent with environmental improvement program objectives, regional plan goals and policies, and the TRPA Governing Board Mitigation Fund policy guidelines. The project complements the control methods test and green infrastructure efforts and was submitted to the U.S. Forest Service Lake Tahoe Restoration Act, or LTRA, priority list to also be considered for funding. So to approve the requested release, the board must make a motion to approve the release subject to the conditions specified in the staff report. We did hear from board member Shelley Aldine a comment to amend condition 5 in the staff report, the last sentence of condition 5, which currently reads, Upon written approval from TRPA, these funds may be reallocated to another project. And she wanted to add within the Tahoe Keys to just be very specific that should they not get the grants that they apply to with written approval, they could use it for another Tahoe Keys project. For the motion to pass, an affirmative vote of any 8 board members is required. And we did receive some public comment, a letter of support from the League to Save Lake Tahoe that we received yesterday, and that should have been emailed to you all by Maria. So before turning it back to the committee for deliberation, next slide, please. We are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Navarro. Are there any questions of the committee? Any questions from committee members online? Seeing none, I have one question of clarification. You specifically mentioned the mitigation fees interest. So the 3.1 that we saw just a moment ago in the financial report, when you showed the various different jurisdictions and account balances, is this 200,000 part of that 3.1? Or is it a different fund?
The chart I was showing you was actually just the year's intake and outtake, but the total balance, the 15 million does include all that money, yes.
Okay,
And the important distinction of the interest is that the interest can be used on more than the actual mitigation function, if that's what she's talking about with that. Like I said
Gotcha.
earlier. So,
well, I think Ms. Aldean's recommendation on amending item number 5 is really good. So let's go ahead and move on to public comment then. If there's no other comments from the committee, if any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by TRPA staff. Are there any members online?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment.
Okay, perfect. And I didn't ask if there were anybody in person that had public comment. Okay, seeing none, then we will close public comment. Are there any further comments from the committee? If not, I'll entertain a motion at this time.
So moved.
So moved again with the
With the
amendment.
changes, with the amendment to
With
condition 5.
the proposed changes by
I'm sorry.
member Aldine.
Do you mind just, there's a motion on page, I'm sorry,
Oh,
the pages
okay.
are 103.
A motion to recommend to the governing board approval and release subject to the conditions in the staff summary as amended by member Aldine.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Okay, Maria, would you please do a roll call vote?
Ms. Bowman,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Dis,
Yes.
Mr. Hoonigan,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Lane.
Yes.
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
Great. All right, next up is our quarterly treasurer's report. This is an information only item. This can be found on page 163 of your packet. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we won't be taking public comment on this item until we do the general public comment at the end of the meeting. Mr. Kyler?
Thank you. Chris Kyler, Finance Director for the agency. I'll be a little brief here because in addition to my quarterly treasurer's report, we have Bruce Remington, who is our financial advisor for the pool that we have invested with the principal group. And he comes around every year, once a year, to do a general briefing for this committee and their status and things like that. So we'll get into that. That's the very next item on here. So this would be a very brief one. In terms of highlights, the main thing is we moved some money out of LAIF in anticipation of the CTC project. It's going to be delayed a few months. We may want to move it back into LAIF and then bring it back when it's ready. As I mentioned before, the cash flow has peaked and is now in decline. And the investment pool is still, I mean, with all the stuff going on in the market, it's still fairly short and it's still heavily into treasuries and into LAIF and LGIP, which are kind of investment pools. I have to confess, the staff summary has an error in it. The pie chart, which will be on the next chart they show here, says 3% corporate. It's actually 5% corporate. My apologies, that pie chart was pulled from an earlier data point. And there were no major rating changes for anything, which is not surprising since there's such a small portion of the pool is rated. We could have the next chart, please. I know these graphs are a little bit hard to see, but on the left, you have the distribution of the investments. So you can see that most of it's in the LAIF and LGIP, and that's cash flow management. The US government and the corporate types, those are monies that are in the principal group pool that Bruce will be talking to us about. And again, in terms of maturities, it's very short. The investment pools to a large extent operate kind of like money market funds. They're not really money market funds, but there's nothing really long in there. They're very short term because it's all cash management for local governments and stuff in the 2 states. And then over on the right, I've excluded the government securities and only used the commercial. And again, it's a very small group of investments, but everything is within our investment policy. We only have, I think, 1 security that's at the bottom end of the investment range, but it's still in the investment range. So we don't have anything in there that's in any way at risk. It's all investment grade securities. That's pretty much it, unless somebody has any particular questions. Otherwise, we can transition into Bruce's presentation.
Are there any questions by committee members? Okay, anybody online have any questions? Okay, and since this was informational only, well, thank you for that report. And as you say, transition right into the next item.
Okay, all of you should have this book at your seats. This is a longer book that they put together, and Bruce will talk through this as part of this presentation. This is Bruce Remington. He's been with us for quite a while because he was with Wells Fargo when this pool started with Wells Fargo. And then he got sold to Principal Group. So,
and we're all happy. Yeah, thanks, Chris. I've been working with you since, trying to remember the guy's name now. He was before Rhonda. So I've been on this for quite a while, and good customer. I really enjoy working with you. We loved working with Chris over the years. I'm going to start off on the 4th page, a real brief economic rundown. And I'm not going to, some of this is actually somewhat dated. As luck would have it, I got an email about 7 this morning when I was in the hotel saying the 1231 review books are finished early. Our standard is 20 business days after the end of the quarter, which unfortunately is the 30th. And so I came with the 930 numbers, but I have updated performance, so I can give that to you. So looking at kind of a brief rundown on the economy and to update these, first bullet point was global growth is facing a number of headwinds. And really through much of the year into the 3rd quarter, even into the 4th before Christmas, everyone was really worried, what's going to go on here, rising rates, oil prices, et cetera. And we actually ended up with a pretty decent year economically. And we think right now the global growth is somewhat coming off the boil. We think we'll have a very mild recession sometime late first half of the year, but much of that's priced into the market. And I've been doing this for a long time. I hate to say how long. My first bear market was 73, 74, which led to the Arab oil embargo. So I have a little bit of concern of what's going on in the Red Sea right now because I've seen this a few times. But having said that, I've never seen the Fed be able to stick the landing yet. But they're trying, and we probably have as good a chance here as we do at any point. Inflation is definitely decelerating. It was pretty slow in terms of decelerating through the year. By the end of the year, though, we've seen quite a drop off in inflation, and that's been reflected in a drop in bond yields. The good news is we had a lot of money locked up at higher yields even over the last 6 months, but the portfolio is pretty well situated in that case. We're coming toward the end of the tightening cycle. Right now, the Fed is on hold. Most other central banks are on hold. So the aggressive rate increases we saw over the last 18, 24 months to try to choke off inflation are starting to come to an end. The Fed's still trying to see what the next couple months of data comes in at in terms of inflation, in terms of growth. volatility. So right now they're on hold, but we wouldn't look for any rate cuts until maybe later this year. But again, it's very, very much data dependent. Equities, you don't really care about in this account, but everybody thinks, well, you're in the investment business, you must know something. We think they're going to be fairly volatile between now and the middle of the year. The market's trying to adjust with slower growth, but mitigate moderate inflation. We think that rate cuts and a slowing economy are priced into the market right now. The other thing that's been really interesting is it's very much a bifurcated market, the so-called Magnificent Seven, which used to be the FANG. I mean, they change all the time, but basically 70% of the returns in the S&P were driven by 7 ultra big mega cap technology oriented stocks. The rest of the market really kind of lagged. Typically, when you start at a period of the Fed has peaked and they're starting to cut rates, typically you get a broader market. So we could see better performance from value, small cap and mid cap, which were pretty miserable last year. But again, I'm a bond guy, so I don't get into that too much. We definitely had a significant sell-off. The good news is the way our portfolio is structured, where we were extremely short-term, very high quality. So when we saw the huge sell-off at the long end in the middle part of the curve, the Barclays Ag long bonds, they just got creamed over the last couple of years. We're sitting there in high quality short-term bonds and ended up pretty good. The yield curve actually inverted to where yields were higher at the short end of the curve than they were at the long. And we were able to take advantage of that by buying good, high quality and high coupon bonds just a couple of years out. And Chris and I talk periodically, and we've stayed mostly in that 2-year range. I hold bonds to maturity. If you look at the index, as soon as a bond gets to 1 year to go, it drops out of the index. We've always held the bonds through maturity. So we'll continue to do that. So I'm going to have some nice bonds with fat coupons that we're going to roll off over the next couple of years. But at this point, we're starting to see a little bit more stability. Rates have dropped a little bit. The spreads between corporates and treasuries are really tight now. So while I have the ability to buy investment grade, upper investment grade corporates in this portfolio, I've limited to 13-15%. There's just not a compelling reason to step down in quality or get overly aggressive. At some points in the cycle, you pick up 200, 300 basis points by buying a single A 5 years out. Right now, you're not getting that. There's no reason to do that. Same is actually true with agency bonds. If you've looked at this portfolio over the last 15 years that I've run it, you'd see significant exposure to U.S. agency bonds, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Farm Credit, that type of thing. I used to pick up 0.5%, 0.75% for doing that. Now I pick up 5 basis points and I give up liquidity. So what you're seeing now is treasuries and not a lot of agency bonds in there. If you'll flip ahead to page 7, this has a yield curve on it. And I think this is kind of an interesting exercise to quickly look at. And you can see how much rates have changed. If you look at September 30th of 2020, we were 6 months into the pandemic. And at that point, the Fed had flooded the system with liquidity and the economy had fallen on its face. You remember second quarter of 2020, we had like a 30% downdraft, and then followed in the third quarter by a significant uptick in equity performance and the economy in general. The Fed flooded the system with money. The yield on a 2-year treasury bond was 0.13%. Money market was essentially zero. Passbook saving was zero. Interest on your bank account was zero. Even the 10-year was at 68 basis points. The 2-10 spread was 56 bips, which is very narrow. But the difference between a 2-year and a 10-year bond is a little over 0.5%. We were at the short end there. By 21, we were recovering. We were up to a whopping 28 basis points, but the 10-year had gone up quite a bit to 149. By September of 2022, a year ago, based on this report, 2 years, now inflation had really kicked in. Inflation had gone from transitory to, really embedded in the system, and the market reacted. 2-year treasuries went up to 4.28. The 10-year went up to 3.83. That's a spike of 400 basis points at the short end and 235 at the long end. By September 30th of 2023, 2 years had gone all the way up to 5.04. Monday, they were at 4.10. So we've seen rates drop a bit at the short end. You know, fortunately, we're locked in with some pretty good stuff. The 10-year, on the other hand, went from 3.83 to 4.57 by the end of the third quarter. It's at 3.95 this morning. So we've seen a drop in interest rates. Now, the impact on that is if you own long bonds, last quarter was just really terrific. You made a lot of money. The ag was up 6 and change. We didn't participate in that because we're at the short end of the curve. On the other hand, we'll get to performance here in just a second. In fact, I'll have you turn to page 9. And this is the cash flow, and I've got these numbers updated. Cash flows as of September 30th for the quarter, we started at 12 million. We made 114,000 to end at 12 million, 186,356. As of the end of the year, we were up to 12,439,073. We made about 253,000 in income and price change during the fourth quarter. Our 1-year number basically made 380,000. That is now up to 533,000 as of the end of the year. So the coupon went from being a measly 0.5 to 0.75% to some pretty attractive coupons. And we don't trade this account. We're not trying to play interest rates and bounce back and forth. It's, you know, rule 1, don't screw up and embarrass Chris. Rule 2, don't screw up and have Chris have to explain to you what's gone wrong. And rule 3 is don't forget the first 2 rules. So we're in pretty good shape there. If you flip the page to 10, here's a rundown of what we own. I'm not going to go through all these in detail. You can just see a boatload of treasuries. At the end of the quarter, I was about 13.42% in corporate bonds. And you can see they're all really high quality. Amazon, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Huntington National Bank, JP Morgan, Royal Bank of Canada, and Toronto Dominion. And heavy in banks. First of all, banks are about half the corporate market to begin with, but there's where I had good quality. The Huntington Bank, by the way, matured on October 6th of 2023 after this print, after the quarter printed. I replaced that with a Bank of New York Mellon bank, 250,000 par, essentially basically swapped for another financial. I'm now at about 13.19% in corporates. Rest of them are treasuries. As I mentioned, you're not seeing any agency bonds in here. The spreads are just way too tight. Let's go to page 12 and we'll talk about performance. Numbers here are pretty decent. For the quarter ended September 30th, we're up 0.95%. The benchmark, which is a blend of cash and the 1 to 5, get it exactly here, the benchmark's actually stated on page 16. You don't need to roll there, but the benchmark is the Bloomberg government credit 1 to 3A or better, and then 5% in US Treasury bills. So that blended benchmark was up 0.74. We outperformed by 21 basis points. You see your fiscal number is also good, 95 basis points versus 74 for the benchmark. 1-year number as of September 30th, we were up 3.22%. The benchmark was up 273, and that is a net number on performance, by the way, not gross. That's net. Net, we're up 322 versus the benchmark at 273, outperformed by 49 bips. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the benchmark, this blend of cash and short bonds, up 273. If you drop down where it says fixed income, Bloomberg US Aggregate Bond Index, here's the broad market was only up 0.64. So that reflected rising rates in longer to intermediate term bonds. We were short. In fact, notice in the third quarter, ended up September 30th, the Bloomberg Ag was down 323. That's in that 3-month column. Our index was up 0.74 and the portfolio was up 0.95. Now, if I look at that number for the fourth quarter, which I just saw this morning, the ag was up 6.5%. So we obviously really lagged that, but our numbers are still positive. The good news is on a 3-year basis, we only made 63 basis points, but the benchmark was down 29 basis points. We outperformed by almost a percentage point. The ag was down 521. And if I look at the 3-year number, we're up 130. The benchmark is up 46, and that's net. So underperformed by 16 basis points, but the long bond, or the intermediate bonds measured by the ag were only up 0.10%. So you can see over the long haul, this approach has worked pretty darn well. We've been able to hang on to the assets, not put the stuff at risk, and still make you some money. Looking at the 12/31 numbers, I've got those here. Our 1-year number, we're up 448. The benchmark is up 452. On a 3-year basis, we're up 133. The benchmark is up only 0.52%. We're ahead by 81 bips. We're at 158 versus 173 on a 5-year. I'll get these numbers. I'll get the updated book to Chris by email. But in other words, we've avoided a tremendous amount of volatility. We've still made some decent money, not put the assets at risk. Let's go to page 17. I'll quickly run through how the portfolio is structured. Haven't really changed much since September 30th, other than a couple swaps. The portfolio profile on the left-hand side, the dark bar is the benchmark. What's in investment grades, what's in treasuries, government related, etc. The lighter blue bars are where we're invested. Agency, we have 0 exposure. It's about 5% exposure for the benchmark. Government related credits, about 3%. We have 0 there. Investment grade corporate, we're underweighted. We're overweighted in treasuries. This is not a hero beat the market portfolio. It's rule 1 and rule 2 portfolio. And we've done what we're supposed to do. On the right-hand side, you can see the sector breakdown, significantly underweighted in investment grade corporates versus treasuries. I'm comfortable with that. And, Chris and I have had a couple discussions over the last couple of years. We've stayed short. Part of it is make sure you've got the liquidity there. And I know you've got, the bulk of the assets in the LGIP and the LAIF accounts. That's fine. We're always happy to take more and do this with it, but that's your cushion. And I don't want this to be sitting out there that you're worried about. On page 18, you can see where the maturities are. About 45% of the portfolio is in 0 to 1 year. 1 to 5 years, we're out at about 44% of the portfolio. You can see that with the benchmark, that's where the bulk of the assets are. Why did we do what we did? If I look at this over the last 3 years, we were up 63 bips. The benchmark was down 39 basis points. The ag over the last 3 years at the time this thing printed was down 521. So you've got a positive environment, a positive return in this net when the bond market pretty well got butchered. So pretty comfortable with what's going on. I'll finish up talking about, what's in the portfolio right now. On page 19, lists the corporate bonds. Notice there are no triple Bs. Legally, I can hold triple Bs. I have to let you know if it's a downgrade. I think there are only a couple times I've done that. I had a Best Buy bond got downgraded one time, and it was like 65 days to maturity, and they had just rolled over and refinanced their previous issue. I knew that one was okay. We held that to maturity. I've had a couple others, but there's nothing triple B rated now, even though they're legal to hold. Your policy is A or better to buy, triple B to hold. If it gets downgraded, I've got rid of it. Everything else is a treasury. Go to page 20. This will give you the summary. 12,180,000 are option adjusted yield to worst. And yield to worst means if something gets called away and you get less money by being called than holding the maturity, is 525. Our option adjusted duration is 1.08. My thought at this point is we probably can start stretching out a little bit. start going out a little bit in the 2 and 3 years, if that's okay with you guys. Gals, that's where I would be inclined to do, stretch this a smidge, lock in some of these yields. But again, not with the idea of moving a lot further out on the curve. There's just not a lot to be made there. And then if we get a bounce back in yields, I don't want to come back and tell you, oops, sorry. I'll end on page 21. These are the things that we purchased during the quarter, about $1 million worth of treasury bonds. One that matures in just about a week in 24, the other one in June of 24, and then a Coca-Cola bond that matures in late 24. I'd like to start buying stuff again in 25. Just makes sense to lock in some of these decent yields. On the next page, it shows sales. We didn't have any. If we sell a bond, it will show up on this page. If it matures, it doesn't. So that's pretty much where we are. Portfolio did what it was supposed to do. I'd like to do a little bit of repositioning now that we've got some economic stability, but again, it depends on what you see as potential cash needs. If there's anything that's coming that might drain this a little bit, then I'll hold a little bit more short term. But if this remains a stable base, you know, perfect timing, I probably should have stretched the maturities out 3 months ago. You know, perfect timing, I would have been cute and tried to stretch the maturities out a year ago when rates were higher and then got killed. It didn't do that. So I'm pretty comfortable with where we are. Any questions or comments or concerns?
I just wanted to make one comment too on the way you structured the pool is not buying huge bonds, but smaller numbers between 100, 200, 300, maybe 500,000 if you look at the list. And they're kind of laddered out. So we don't really have a big hit where all of a sudden in one bad month, everything matures. So we have to reinvest at a lower. It stretches out, so it's much less risky. That's a pretty good strategy. And I agree that it's probably time to start looking a little bit more long-term now that there's a little bit more stability going on.
Yeah, I agree with that also. Are there any comments from committee members in the room? Come on, you guys, this was the most exciting report we have. Are there any questions from committee members online? Okay, seeing none, then again, this was an informational item, so thank you for that presentation. And again, I would just circle back and say, I think it's time to go for those 2 to 3 years with the few that are going to come to maturity. Great report. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your business.
Agree with that too. And thank you.
And again, Chris Kyler, Finance Director. Conceptually, the way I look at this pool is it's kind of where I kind of think of it conceptually as being long-term stuff like the mitigation funds and the securities that are actually pretty stable. They come in, they go out, with the exception of a really big project, the CTC project. We don't see a huge disbursement, but that keeps us from having to liquidate anything early and taking any kind of a hit from a premature liquidation of a bond.
Yeah,
So-
I think we're sitting in a really good position and
Yeah.
yeah, job well done. Okay, that'll bring us up to item number 7, upcoming topics. Mr. Kyler? You have
Okay, the
anything
big
coming
one,
up?
I think of next chart, please. We have not done a general increase in the AIS inspection decontamination fees for 5 years. The program is in good health financially, but we've taken some hits lately. We've lost some DBW money grants. That's not a reflection on us or on the program. It's just the beginning of the DBW mussel grants. We were the only game in town, so we had all the money. Now everybody's fighting mussels in all the lakes, and so it's certainly fair for other people to get a shot at that money too. So we've lost a fair amount of money in those grants. We're also seeing a lot of staffing pressures in the stations. And it's kind of critical that you bring back as many of the experienced guys as you can, because if they screw up on a decontamination, they can actually damage the boat, and we have to pay to fix the boat, which does not do much for customer satisfaction, shall we say. So we are starting to see some cost pressures on there. We do have reserves, but we think it's time to get back into a regular cycle of annually reviewing and increasing those fees. We've done some little tweaks here and there, trying to match up some areas where our fee just wasn't even close to collecting the cost. But we haven't done a general increase for 5 years. I don't want to do the whole presentation. Dennis would be in next month and they'll go through the whole thing with you and they'll bring it to this committee and then to the governing board for. So that's the big one coming up in the immediate future. We are going to get started on doing our budgets for the coming year. So hopefully I'll bring you the major issues and the major assumptions in May so we can talk through those. Well, maybe not me. Somebody will bring you in May, those things. I hope to be on the road then.
How's that working out?
So I gave my 2 weeks notice 9 months ago. So, but budget is coming up. We did have our first interim committee meeting yesterday in the state of Nevada. There was a lot of attendance, a lot of public comment. I did want to mention one thing, that one of the issues that's coming up is people are talking about whether or not we're as transparent as we should be. So just put it back on this committee. If there's more that you want to see, let me know and we will provide that. I'm trying to strike a balance between burying you in minutiae and actually giving you real information to use. Obviously, I don't present anywhere near close to what's in the staff summary and the attachments to the staff summary, but if there's something that you want to see more of, let me know and we'll be happy to provide that. So.
Appreciate that very much and appreciate the fact that you gave your 2 weeks notice 9 months ago and you're still helping us out. I'm sorry about that, but I also dread the day that you're gone as well. So
Madam Chair, could I ask a question?
please, Ms.
Um, I prefer to see regular smaller increases than waiting 5 years. I mean, there's been a lot of cost increase just in labor, right? And I, as one board member, I'd rather see that kind of annualized adjustment than a big change. And I know these dollars are small, but every dollar is helping.
There's method to the madness.
Okay.
I mean, basically the way we kind of structured the program was for the fees and the state funds to cover the cost of the prevention program. But then we started picking up all this grant money. So that allowed us to bank funds. And that's why we haven't been bringing you increases for the last 5 years, because it didn't seem right to increase the fees when you're sitting on a pile of money. That's why.
Okay.
Now everything's working against us.
Totally makes
I
sense.
really want to hit you on the labor one because literally the hourly rate we have to pay the inspectors is doubled. And we still can't staff the stations. So that TRCD contract's like $1.5 million. So single biggest contract in the agency, except for, well, maybe one of the monitoring contracts. Yeah. We'll go with that. next
Great explanation. Thank you.
Do either of our virtual members have any comments on this item?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Then we will go on to agenda item number 8, which is committee member comments. Nope. Anybody online? General comments?
No comments. Thank you.
Okay. Our final matter of business is our general public interest comment period. If any member of the public wishes to address the Operations and Governance Committee at this time on any of the 3 informational items we had or any other item that you wish to bring forward, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Are there any members in the room that would like to address this group? Please form a line, one by one. Are there anybody online?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised online to comment.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. The